Charlie Kirk leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain, and hurled the kind of insult designed to pierce, to humiliate, to dominate. You don't belong here. People like you should sit down and let the adults talk. The words sliced through the air like a blade. The room froze. For a split second, the silence was louder than the insult itself. You could feel the audience hold its breath, as if unsure whether they had just witnessed a political jab or an act of open disrespect that crossed every line. Kirk's smirk lingered, his eyes scanning the crowd as though he had already claimed victory. It was the same swagger he carried into countless debates, the arrogance of a man who believed intimidation was his sharpest weapon. But this time it was different. This time his target wasn't just anyone. It was Jasmine Crockett. And those watching knew deep down that history was about to bend. Every camera in the room zoomed tighter. The moderators glanced nervously, unsure if the event had just spiraled into something they couldn't contain. Even Kirk's own supporters didn't clap right away. They looked at each other, hesitating, almost as if they sensed the line had been crossed. And in that hesitation, something shifted because Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Not once. She sat in perfect stillness, her eyes locked on Kirk with a calm that radiated power. The silence surrounding her wasn't weakness, it was anticipation. You could feel the energy coil tighter with every passing second, like the room itself was waiting for a thunderclap. This wasn't just a debate. It was a battle over dignity, respect, and what America chooses to value in its leaders. Would arrogance win again? Or would grace finally put arrogance in its place? Viewers at home leaned in closer to their screens. Social media feeds were already lighting up with stunned reactions. Did Kirk really just say that? This is about to get messy. The tension wasn't confined to the stage anymore, it was spilling into living rooms, bars, college dorms. Everywhere people gathered to watch this clash unfold, and then, just as Kirk settled back into his chair, convinced he had cornered her, Jasmine Crockett drew in a single breath. Her lips parted, her eyes unblinking. But no one expected what Jasmine Crockett would say next. The insult alone would have been enough to ignite the room. But to understand why it hit so hard, you have to understand the stage it landed on. This wasn't just another political forum. This was a night framed as a collision of two Americas, one clinging to intimidation, bluster, and the old politics of fear, and another daring to demand dignity, equality, and a voice that couldn't be silenced. Every chair was filled, every camera was live, and every word spoken had the power to echo far beyond that auditorium. Charlie Kirk believed this was his arena. For years he had built his reputation on overwhelming opponents with rapid-fire talking points, cheap shots designed to rattle, and a brand of confidence that blurred into condescension. He thrived on spectacle, on turning debates into gladiator pits where he strutted as though victory was predetermined. And in his mind, Jasmine Crockett was the perfect foil. A young black congresswoman from Texas who, in his calculation, could be caricatured, dismissed, and drowned out. To Kirk, this wasn't just a debate. It was a chance to flex dominance, but he miscalculated. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't stepping into this forum as a guest in someone else's house. She came as a representative of millions. Women, people of color, immigrants, and everyday Americans who had been told for generations to stay quiet, while others defined the rules. Her presence on that stage was itself a statement. That the America Kirk was trying to belittle was not only here, it was ready to fight back. The audience could feel it. Each jab Kirk delivered wasn't just against Crockett. It carried the weight of history, of every time arrogance tried to silence dignity. People shifted uneasily in their seats. Some gasped. Others whispered. And outside the auditorium, thousands were tuned in online. Comment sections flooding with disbelief. He really thinks this will work? This isn't going to end the way he thinks, because this wasn't just about political sparring. This was America's values on trial. Respect versus contempt. Inclusion versus exclusion. Truth versus the theater of ego. The stakes were higher than applause lines. They were about which vision of the country would resonate when the microphones went cold and the lights dimmed. Kirk leaned into his strategy, convinced Crockett would stumble. He thought the louder he barked, the more he could corner her. And for a moment it almost looked like he might succeed. He controlled the floor, the headlines, the rhythm. His words echoed off the walls with the swagger of someone who had gotten away with this routine 100 times before. But Crockett didn't take the bait. She didn't lash out. She didn't shrink. She sat with a composure that rattled him more than any immediate comeback could have. The restraint was strategic. Every second she stayed silent was a second Kirk revealed more about himself than he realized. Every sneer, every smirk, every patronizing dismissal built the tension higher. Until the audience wasn't wondering if she'd respond, they were desperate to know how. And then, just when it looked like Kirk had her cornered, Jasmine Crockett moved. She leaned forward, her expression calm, her voice steady, carrying the kind of weight that doesn't need volume to command authority. The room braced itself, because what came next wouldn't just answer Kirk. It would change the entire debate. To understand why Charlie Kirk's words dripped with such certainty, you have to understand them and behind them. Kirk didn't rise to prominence by accident. He built his empire on a carefully crafted image. The brash young firebrand who could turn any conversation into a brawl and walk away claiming victory. His brand wasn't policy or compromise or leadership. His brand was combat, and for years that strategy worked. Kirk burst onto the scene as a fresh-faced provocateur, founding a conservative student organization that promised to fight back against what he framed as liberal dominance on college campuses. He wasn't there to persuade, he was there to dominate. His rallies were full of zingers designed not to elevate discourse, but to score clips that would go viral online. He spoke in absolutes, thrived on outrage, and positioned himself as the voice of a younger generation tired of nuance. To his supporters, that made him bold. To his critics, it made him dangerous. One thing was clear. Kirk understood the performance of politics better than most. He realized that in an age of social media, the loudest voice often drowned out the most thoughtful. And so he leaned into volume. He leaned into smugness. He leaned into a style that treated opponents not as fellow Americans with different views, but as caricatures to be mocked, shouted down, or dismissed. The debates weren't about ideas, they were about humiliation. And time after time he got away with it. On campuses, he'd face students nervous to challenge him and steamroll them with rehearsed one-liners. On talk shows, he'd speak over guests, never allowing them the oxygen to build a case. In forums, he'd rely on the force of personality and their rhythm of attack after attack, wearing down his opponents until they either stumbled or walked away. That to him was victory, but arrogance has a way of blinding. Because what Kirk failed to realize was that his playbook wasn't invincible. It was repetitive. His tricks weren't sharp insights, they were patterns. And those patterns had limits, especially when faced with someone who had seen them before. It wasn't just arrogance in general. There was a specific thread running through Kirk's history, a tendency to underestimate strong women. Time and again, he leaned on the belief that condescension could break them. That belittling tone, that dismissive smirk, the insinuation that they were out of their depth, it wasn't accidental. It was calculated. And for years it rattled some of his opponents enough for him to chalk it up as another win. But Jasmine Crockett was not just another opponent. She was a lawyer by training, a congresswoman who had sharpened her skills in some of the most high-pressure environments politics could offer. More importantly, she embodied every community Kirk had spent years trying to trivialize or dismiss. To him, she was supposed to be an easy target. To her, he was just another bully who mistook volume for vision. The night of their debate, Kirk walked in with the same confidence that had carried him for a decade. His fans expected another spectacle, another clip of him owning a so-called rival. The smirk he wore wasn't just for Crockett. It was for the cameras, for the headlines he thought would write themselves before the night was even over. He saw her as a stepping stone, a prop in his ongoing performance. But beneath the surface, cracks in his strategy were already showing. Audiences were changing. The country was changing. People had seen the sneers, the interruptions, the bluster, and increasingly they weren't impressed, they were exhausted. What once played as bold now came across as arrogance. What once looked like strength now looked like insecurity. Kirk hadn't adapted because he didn't believe he had to, and that was his greatest flaw. He believed Crockett would crumble under the same old tactics. He believed her silence in the opening exchange was proof that his words had landed. What he didn't realize was that every insult he hurled was digging a deeper hole for himself. Every smirk, every condescending line was not weakening her. It was setting the stage for her to rise. The truth was, Kirk's empire was built on controlling the conversation. But in that auditorium, for the first time, he wasn't in control. The audience could feel it. They leaned forward not to savor his jabs, but to anticipate her response. The tide was already shifting, and he didn't even know it. Kirk had faced critics before. He had faced opponents who pushed back, but never one who embodied calm power the way Jasmine Crockett did, never one who carried not just her own voice, but the weight of a larger movement behind her. And in just a few moments, that overconfidence, the very trait that built his career, would trigger the downfall he never saw coming. But this time, his usual playbook would backfire badly. To truly understand the weight of Jasmine Crockett's calm that night, the stillness in her posture, the unshaken resolve in her eyes, you have to trace her journey. Because Crockett did not arrive on that stage by accident. She was forged in struggle, defined by service and sharpened by battles far tougher than Charlie Kirk's rehearsed bravado. Jasmine Crockett's story is the kind that embodies the American promise, the belief that perseverance, intelligence, and grit can carve out space in a world that too often tries to close its doors. Born and raised in St. Louis, she didn't grow up with privilege at her fingertips. She grew up with determination in her bones. The daughter of working-class parents, she saw firsthand the struggles that everyday families endured, long hours, tight paychecks, and the endless fight to keep dignity intact in a system that didn't always make it easy. That background didn't weaken her, it steeled her. When others might have resigned themselves to survival, she chose to fight for something greater. Education became her first battlefield. While some underestimated her, assuming she would settle for less, she outworked and outstudied expectations. She earned her law degree, not because it was easy, but because she knew the law was one of the most powerful weapons against injustice. As an attorney, Crockett didn't chase prestige. She fought for those who couldn't afford a voice. Criminal, defense, civil rights cases. She stood beside people society too often tossed aside. Courtrooms became her training ground, where she learned how to dismantle arrogance with facts, how to pierce through bluster with clarity, and how to stay composed while others tried to shout her down. Every case, every client, every late night. Preparing briefs was a rehearsal for standing against someone like Kirk. Her legal career propelled her into politics, but she didn't enter the halls of power to bask in status. She entered because the same communities she had defended in court needed stronger voices in government. She ran for office, facing skepticism, facing whispers that she was too bold, or too outspoken, or too direct. Yet, time and again, she won. Not just elections, but respect. Her reputation grew as someone who could not only hold her ground, but turn attacks into opportunities. Crockett's sharp comebacks became legendary. When colleagues in Congress underestimated her, they quickly learned she wasn't someone who could be dismissed with a smirk or a jab. She combined legal precision with street-smart instincts, cutting through noise with lines that carried both sting and truth. For her supporters, those moments weren't just entertaining, they were validating. She was proof that dignity didn't have to be quiet, that standing up didn't mean softening down. But what truly set Crockett apart wasn't just her intellect or her quick wit. It was her resilience. She had been underestimated too many times to count. She had faced sexism, racism, classism, and the toxic brew of all three. And each time she didn't just survive, she rose. She didn't play the role society tried to assign her. She wrote her own script, and in doing so she gave others permission to do the same. That's what made her showdown with Kirk so electric. For him, it was another chance to perform. For her, it was personal, but not just for herself. She was carrying the weight of history, the weight of every young black girl told to stay quiet, every immigrant told they didn't belong, every woman who had been dismissed in a boardroom, courtroom, or classroom. When Kirk sneered, he wasn't just sneering at Jasmine Crockett. He was sneering at all of them, and she knew it. Her composure in those opening moments wasn't passivity. It was strategy, rooted in a lifetime of experience. She had learned that sometimes silence unsettles the loudest opponents more than words. She had learned that timing was everything, that the right phrase delivered with precision could cut deeper than any barrage of insults. And she had learned that the best comebacks weren't about cleverness alone. They were about truth, revealed at the exact moment It could not be ignored. So when she sat there unflinching watching Kirk perform for the crowd, she wasn't intimidated. She was calculating. Every word he uttered only added to the evidence she would soon present, not as a lawyer in a courtroom, but as a leader on a stage that had suddenly become America's jury box. By the time that debate rolled around, Crockett had already proven herself countless times over. She wasn't just a congresswoman, she was a fighter for justice, a defender of the voiceless, a woman whose very presence in power was a rebuke to those who thought the system would always belong to people like Kirk. And yet, she never wore arrogance. Her strength wasn't about crushing others to elevate herself. It was about lifting others while refusing to bow to disrespect. That's why the crowd leaned forward when she finally prepared to speak. They knew her reputation. They had seen the clips, the viral moments, the sharpness of her mind and the fire in her voice. But this was different. This wasn't a committee hearing or a courtroom or even a campaign stage. This was a direct confrontation with someone who embodied everything she'd spent her life fighting against. And as the tension reached its breaking point, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, ready to deliver the words that would redefine the entire night. And all of that came to bear in one unforgettable moment. The atmosphere inside the auditorium tightened like a rope pulled taut. Charlie Kirk could sense the eyes on him, and he leaned into his usual act, voice rising, hands chopping through the air like a conductor of chaos. "You think you represent America?" he sneered, jabbing a finger toward Jasmine Crockett. "You're a fraud. You don't belong in these halls of power. You're a token paraded around to check a box." The words dropped like stones, heavy with disdain. A few gasps rippled through the crowd, but Kirk didn't pause to let them settle. He cut over Crockett before she could answer, steamrolling with another line. "You can't debate real ideas. You hide behind identity politics because that's all you have." The arrogance was suffocating, the interruptions relentless. He spoke not to engage, but to drown her out, to create a spectacle that would echo online in 30-second clips. The cadence was familiar, louder, faster, harsher, as though sheer volume could substitute for substance. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She sat, spine straight, her gaze locked on him, giving nothing away. It was the kind of composure that infuriates a man like Kirk, because silence in the face of bluster doesn't signal weakness. It signals control. The audience picked up on it. Every insult Kirk hurled was met not with Crockett's collapse, but with her quiet patience. She didn't interrupt. She didn't scramble. She let him keep talking. And in doing so, she let him reveal exactly who he was, a man unraveling in real time. "You know why people like you fail?" Kirk continued, his tone dripping with scorn. "Because you've never earned your spot. You've been handed everything. You're here because of pity, not merit." The room bristled. Some audience members shook their heads. Others exchanged incredulous looks. Even those sympathetic to Kirk began to shift uncomfortably, because there's a difference between arguing ideas and openly insulting someone's humanity. And Kirk, blind in his overconfidence, couldn't see that line disappearing beneath his feet. Still, Crockett stayed calm. She tilted her head slightly as if studying him the way a lawyer studies a hostile witness. Every time he talked over her, every time he doubled down, the tension climbed higher. Who would break first? Would Crockett finally lash out, or would Kirk burn himself out in his own firestorm? Minutes passed in this tug-of-war. Kirk dominated airtime, but he wasn't winning hearts. Crockett's restraint became the story. Her calm presence a quiet thunder that grew louder with every arrogant jab. The audience was no longer enthralled by Kirk's aggression. They were waiting, almost aching, for Crockett to finally strike back. Kirk, oblivious, kept pressing. "You don't speak for America. You speak for fringe radicals who hate this country. You're a disgrace to Congress." That was it. The line that hung in the air heavier than the rest. A disgrace. A word meant to erase, to dehumanize. The crowd stirred, whispers spreading like sparks across dry grass. People knew something was about to break, And that's when Crockett moved. Not dramatically, not with the kind of flailing gestures Kirk relied on. Just a slow lean forward, eyes never leaving his, her lips parted, steady, deliberate. The audience fell silent as if the entire room inhaled at once. They could feel it. This was the moment. Then came the counterstrike that turned the room upside down. The silence was deafening. It was the kind of hush that descends not by command but by instinct. When every person in a room senses something historic is about to happen. Charlie Kirk, chest heaving, smirk plastered across his face, believed he had just delivered the fatal blow. He leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the audience for approval, expecting applause or at least nods of agreement. But what he got instead was a nervous, uneasy stillness. Jasmine Crockett had not spoken in what felt like hours, though it had only been minutes. She'd endured Kirk's interruptions, his condescension, his barbs sharpened with arrogance. She let him empty the chamber of insults, every bullet wasted on noise. And now when he was finally out of breath, when his smirk widened just a little too far, she leaned in. Her voice, calm and unshaken, sliced through the air like a scalpel. "You done?" The audience erupted. Not in laughter, not in applause, but in a collective gasp, as if those two words had cracked the tension like glass. Some in the front row exchanged wide-eyed looks. Others pressed their lips shut to contain the grins fighting their way out. Kirk shifted in his seat, clearly thrown off by the simplicity of the response. Crockett didn't give him time to recover. "You stand here calling me a disgrace to America. You stand here saying I don't belong. Let me remind you, my family didn't build this country on comfort. They built it on sweat, on sacrifice, on facing doors slammed in their faces and still finding a way through. I earned every inch of this seat. I earned every word I speak. And unlike you, Charlie, I don't need to tear others down to prove my worth." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Each sentence landed with the force of a hammer striking a nail, deliberate and exact. The audience leaned forward, hanging on every word. "You call me a token? No, sir, I'm a representative of people who look like me, who sound like me, who've been dismissed by men like you their entire lives. You call me unqualified? I've passed laws, fought cases, delivered results while you've built a career out of yelling into microphones, hoping the loudness would cover the emptiness underneath." A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some began clapping quietly, their restraint breaking. Kirk's smirk flickered, faltered, then returned with less confidence, more like a mask slipping. Crockett pressed on. "You think I'm here to play your game. You think I'm here to match insult with insult, interruption with interruption. But see, the difference between you and me is simple. You mistake a noise for power. I know power comes from truth. And the truth is, what terrifies you most is that people like me aren't just surviving anymore. We're leading, and no amount of shouting will stop it." The auditorium ignited. Applause crashed through the silence like thunder. Cheers rose from the back rows. Students standing on their feet, fists pumping in the air. Phones went up, capturing the moment that would soon flood timelines across the country. Kirk tried to speak, his mouth opening, but the words tangled before they could form. His rehearsed bravado evaporated, replaced by a visible twitch of frustration. He raised his voice to drown out the clapping, but the more he tried, the smaller he seemed. Crockett turned toward him, unflinching. "You wanted to disgrace me? You just disgraced yourself. Because the only thing exposed here tonight isn't me. It's your fear. Fear of losing a grip on the America you think belongs only to you." The crowd roared, the sound reverberating against the walls. Unstoppable. It wasn't just applause, it was release. A collective exhale from an audience tired of watching arrogance gown-checked. Crockett leaned back, her composure intact, her eyes locked on Kirk. She didn't need to say more. She had already detonated the bomb, and Kirk, his shoulder slumped ever so slightly. The smugness drained from his face. For the first time in the evening, he looked smaller. Not the towering provocateur commanding the stage, but a man suddenly realizing his script had collapsed. The moderator attempted to restore order, but it was futile. The room belonged to Crockett now. Her words echoed even after her lips had stopped moving. The audience wasn't just reacting, they were remembering. One student whispered to her friend, "That's history right there." Another shook his head in disbelief, muttering, "She just ended him." Kirk shuffled his notes, pretending to search for his next point, but his hands betrayed him, trembling just enough for the front row to notice. His fallback lines, the ones he had delivered countless times before, sounded hollow now. He had walked into the arena expecting a victory lap, and instead he found himself crushed under the weight of his own arrogance. Crockett, meanwhile, remained unshaken. She let the applause wash over the stage, not gloating, not performing, but simply existing in the power of her truth. She didn't need to bask because the moment spoke for itself. When the cheers finally quieted, Kirk attempted a weak rebuttal. "So you think shouting slogans makes you qualified?" he muttered, but even he seemed unconvinced. His words bounced off the walls and fell flat, swallowed by the memory of Crockett's counterattack. And that was the difference. His words vanished. Hers lingered. The debate was technically still in progress, but the outcome had already been decided. Crockett had seized the narrative, flipped the script, and turned what Kirk thought would be his moment of domination into his most humiliating defeat. The audience knew it. Kirk knew it. And deep down, Crockett knew it too. Because some moments aren't just wins, they're turning points. They're the kind of mic drops that ripple outward, far beyond the walls where they're first spoken. And that's exactly what this was. But the impact didn't end in that room. The clip traveled faster than wildfire. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett's takedown, phones in the auditorium lit up with notifications. By the time the debate had officially ended, Twitter, no, the entire internet, was ablaze. Hashtags shot to the top of the trending list. Crockett clapback, mic drop moment, sit down Charlie, and the blunt but devastating, "You done." Clips flooded TikTok, each edit sharper than the last. One popular version slowed down Crockett's piercing "You done" and replayed Kirk's stunned silence 3 times before the beat of a viral remix dropped. Another overlaid his faltering rebuttal with the sad trombone sound effect. Memes sprouted in real time. Kirk photoshopped into a folding chair labeled "Humility," Crockett crowned with flames like a modern-day folk hero. It wasn't just Gen Z fueling the fire. Influencers, celebrities, and activists piled on. An A-list comedian tweeted, "Charlie Kirk walked in thinking he was the main character. Jasmine Crockett just wrote the script." A best-selling author chimed in, "This wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning." Crockett didn't just answer for herself. She answered for all of us who've been dismissed. Cable networks scrambled to catch up. CNN rolled the clip on loop, anchors marveling at the composure she displayed under relentless interruption. MSNBC labeled it the moment that shook campus politics. Even conservative outlets couldn't resist airing it, though their framing dripped with damage control, accusing Crockett of being overly emotional, a line that only fueled more backlash online. Politicians, too, couldn't stay silent. A progressive senator tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett is exactly why the next generation will not be silenced." Meanwhile, a prominent conservative congressman fumbled through a defense of Kirk, only to be ratioed mercilessly in the comments. With one user replying, "Sir, respectfully, the internet has spoken." The ripple effect stretched beyond politics. High school debate teams posted reaction videos, teachers replayed the clip in civics classes, and even late-night hosts crafted monologues around Kirk's collapse. One joked, "Charlie Kirk brought a megaphone to a symphony and Jasmine Crockett was the conductor." The studio audience howled. For Kirk, the humiliation was total. He had entered the stage expecting headlines that praised his dominance. Instead, his name became synonymous with defeat. Every new meme cemented his downfall further. His usual followers tried to spin it, claiming the crowd was biased, the moderators unfair, but even within his base, the cracks showed. Screenshots of his stunned expression became reaction GIFs for everything from losing an argument to forgetting your password. Meanwhile, Crockett basked not in arrogance, but in validation. She didn't gloat on her accounts. She simply posted a photo from the debate with the caption, "Still standing, always will." That single post garnered hundreds of thousands of likes within hours. Her words resonated because they weren't just about one exchange. They embodied resilience, dignity, and the pride of representing something larger than herself. Interviews poured in. Podcasts, morning shows, political panels all wanted to know what was going through her mind in that moment. How did she stay calm while Kirk unraveled? Crockett's answers only deepened her respect among audiences. She credited her community, her upbringing, and her commitment to truth over theatrics. It wasn't about winning a debate, she explained in one interview. It was about showing that we don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes calm is louder than chaos. And that calm reverberated. Young activists clipped her words for motivation. Memes became rallying cries. A TikTok trend emerged where users stitched Crockett's "You done?" into their own videos, shutting down bosses, exes, or trolls with the same unbothered energy. But behind the humor, something deeper stirred. People who had long felt marginalized saw themselves reflected in her poise. Immigrants, women, and students of color commented under clips, sharing their own experiences of being dismissed or belittled, and how Crockett's stance gave them strength. It was no longer just entertainment, it was empowerment. Charlie Kirk's empire of provocation had run headfirst into a wall he didn't see coming, the wall of dignity that refuses to crumble. He had been exposed, not by louder shouting, but by silence, timing, and truth. And yet, even as social media turned his collapse into a cultural punchline, the story wasn't done. Because beyond the memes, beyond the trending hashtags, beyond the viral clips replayed millions of times, there was something even bigger at play. What happened on that stage was more than a verbal clash. It was a mirror held up to America. On one side stood Charlie Kirk, armed with arrogance, quick insults, and the belief that volume equals victory. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, steady, deliberate, and unflinching, carrying with her not just her own voice, but the weight of countless people who know what it feels like to be dismissed, underestimated, or talked over. Crockett's clapback was more than a clever retort, it was a lesson. A reminder that true strength isn't in shouting down your opponent. It's in standing firm, letting dignity do the heavy lifting and refusing to shrink when others try to belittle you. In that moment, she showed that intelligence can slice through noise, that calm can overpower chaos, and that service, real service, lasts longer than empty arrogance ever will. And this wasn't just about one debate or one exchange. It was about the kind of America people want to live in, an America where a daughter of immigrants or a kid from a working-class neighborhood can step into a room stacked against them and still walk out standing taller. An America where dignity isn't treated as weakness, but as the ultimate source of power. Her restraint spoke louder than Kirk's interruptions. Her clarity outshined his confusion. Her purpose towered above his performance. And people saw it. They felt it. Across living rooms, classrooms, and offices, Americans were confronted with a choice. Do we want leaders who build themselves up by tearing others down, or leaders who lift us higher by standing tall themselves? Crockett's answer, delivered with poise in real time, made that choice feel obvious. She embodied the belief that politics doesn't have to be a cage fight of insults. It can be a platform for truth, for resilience, for representing those who rarely get a seat at the table. She didn't just defend herself. She redefined what it looks like to win. And the beauty of her response was that it transcended partisanship. Anyone, no matter their political leanings, could recognize the core of what happened. A bully tried to dominate, and he failed. Not because he was shouted down, but because his tactics collapsed under the weight of calm, principled conviction. That's a truth as old as history itself. Arrogance burns fast, but dignity endures. In the end, what Jasmine Crockett delivered wasn't just a clapback, it was a vision. A vision of a country where respect trumps ridicule, where intelligence is celebrated rather than mocked, and where leaders are measured not by how loud they are, but by how much light they bring. And that's why this exchange will be remembered long after the headlines fade. Charlie Kirk tried to destroy Jasmine Crockett. He came armed with insults, interruptions, and a playbook designed to rattle her. But instead of crushing her, he crushed his own credibility. What was meant to be his moment of dominance became his undoing, and what was meant to silence her became the very stage where she shined. That's the story we've witnessed. Arrogance falling apart in real time, while dignity, calm, and truth rose higher than anyone expected. And if that doesn't send a message about the kind of leadership America needs, nothing will. But here's the bigger truth. This isn't just Crockett's victory. It belongs to everyone who's ever been underestimated, everyone who's ever been told to sit down, to stay quiet, or to know their place. When Jasmine Crockett stood tall, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for us, and now it's our turn to carry that forward. If you believe in leaders who fight with facts instead of fury, if you believe that respect beats ridicule, then join this movement. Subscribe to this channel. Share this story. Be part of the growing wave of people who are tired of bullies setting the tone in our politics and ready to lift up voices that inspire instead of divide. Because in the end, debates like this aren't just about scoring points. They're about showing the world who we are and who we want to be. And as Jasmine Crockett proved in that unforgettable moment, dignity doesn't just win arguments, it defines history.